in prior years, Latinos or black voters that didn't vote for the Democratic Party just stopped voting. Nowadays, there are more and more people in said demographics that are voting in the opposite direction. That is the new part. America's gold standard national election survey shows a similarly sharp decline, with non-white proximity to Democrats now at its lowest since the 1960s, before the Civil Rights Movement and the 1964 election, which aligned black voters with the Dems and against the GOP. So the non-white shift away from them seems very real, but what's driving it? One factor is fading memories. The Civil Rights Movement and 1964 realignment formed very significant and very strong political bonds for the people who lived through it, but this is less true for more recent generations. The bond between young black Americans and Democrats is far weaker than among older cohorts. I don't think everyone appreciates that the familiar young favor Dems, old favor Republicans gradient we see in the U.S. population overall is inverted among the black population. The oldest black Americans whose political allegiances were formed in the 1960s and 70s identify as Dems over reps by a margin of 82%. Among the youngest black voters who have grown up in a very different socio-political environment, the Democratic advantage is just 33%. The changing image of the parties regarding class and income is also a factor. In 2020, the richest third of voters favored Dems for the first time. Yeah. And the Republicans improved with the poorest. The GOP now appeals to working and middle-class voters of all ethnicities. I think that not doing enough, specifically not doing enough for the working poor, for the working class in general from the Democratic Party is, and this same principle existed in the Texas GOP and how they were able to dominate the Latino voters in Texas in perpetuity. This very same principle exists nationally. Remember, one side offers nothing to you. The other side at least offers a solution and a fake problem. The same principles behind like showing yourself as a macho candidate. The same principles behind like all of the other forms of bigotry that definitely persist in every every subsect of the American population is absolutely, in my opinion, part of the reason. Democrats aren't giving you anything, but the Republicans are at least like preserving your guns, protecting you from having your guns be stolen from you, or not letting your children get queer or whatever kind of madness that they create, and also multiple decades of right-wing sentiment being expressed by both parties as it pertains to deregulation and tax cuts for the wealthy. Tax cuts in general. Obviously, tax cuts for the wealthy are not presented as tax cuts for the wealthy. Tax cuts for the wealthy are presented as tax cuts for the poor. It's sold to the American population as tax cuts for the poor. The starving the beast narrative that was born out of the Reagan years created a worse and worse government, increasingly worse government that was underfunded with a hyper focus on only funding one institution, the military. That, in my opinion, plays a big role in why people are way more willing and able to not want to fund the American government at all. They're like, why the fuck would I? So beyond that, but fading memories and increased competition for working class votes are fixable problems. So long as these voters' values remain fundamentally aligned with those in the Democratic Party, the right reason, policy, or rhetoric can win them back. However, much more ominous for the Democrats is a less widely understood dynamic. Large numbers of non-white Americans have long held much more conservative views than their voting patterns would suggest. Their values are very much not aligned with the party. Now, and this is why I think the Hispanic voting bloc, which is very diverse, obviously, especially with like very specific carve-outs for Cuban voters and Venezuelan voters in places like Florida, for example, the Hispanic voting bloc wants, across all demographics, more social spending. I would say that the black voting bloc also has similar inclinations. Social safety nets are very valuable and very important. These are voter blocs that have not gotten their brains lasered with American austerity and neoliberal propaganda in perpetuity in a similar vein. They recognize the value in social safety nets. They still have somewhat of a belief in the government actually helping them. Not in the same way that like white voting blocs have completely lost sight of that reality. However, that principle is changing because the Democratic Party is also not doing anything on that front either. So when that happens, and one side is not offering you anything and saying, no, 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 things are fine. The other side is racist. The others, and they are, by the way, make no mistake, they are racist. If one party, the Democrats, keep consistently saying, you have to vote for us defensively, you have to vote for us defensively, you have to vote for us for harm reduction, you have to vote for us because if you don't, then the racists are going to come in and charge. Most Americans will do that for 2 election cycles, but then they're going to tap out. And many had tapped out for a while. But the other side is at least offering them a clear-cut reason for why they're experiencing economic hardships and volatility, even if it is a red herring, even if it is a false reality. Why are you angry all the time? It's not because the wealthy are robbing you blind. As a matter of fact, it's because gay people. It's because abortion. It's because this. It's because that. And obviously, it's different for the black voting blocks versus Hispanic voters and whatnot. But the reality of the matter is, one side does not even work to try to address the problem and show what the accurate reasons for said problem are. The other side at least gives you a false analysis and then turns around and says, I will also help save some of the things you care about. But Republicans literally use non-whites as scapegoats and demonize them as non-American. I don't get it. You will never get it if you don't. You will never get this if you only are thinking with the old mindset. The further you move away, like these polls show, the further you move away from the civil rights era where the Democrats did do something for the black population, the government did do something in comparison to genuinely being against it. The further you move away from that, the more people go, okay, well, neither party is giving me anything, so I'm just going to go and vote for the guys that are at least like, I like guns. They're defending guns. This principle has been at the forefront of the Democratic Party's incompetence for my entire lifetime as I have observed the Democratic Party's operations. That very same fight you are seeing right now happen in real time. The more you capitulate the right-wing framing on issues and the more you refuse to counter narrative against things like immigrant crime, for example, and the more you cave and the more you concede that, yes, actually immigration is a matter of national defense and national security and not simply an economic proposition created by reactionary forces that want to create a steady pool of undocumented migrants that they can further exploit, that depresses wages for the natural-born working class and the other naturalized and documented working class in this country. The more you move away from that reality, the more people become reactionary. That's it. This is the fault and failure of the Democratic Party. They do not fight back against Republican framing on issues, and then they end up adopting it. And what do you think happens when they adopt right-wing framing? Well, you know what happens. People are going to go with the guy that they trust to deal with this issue. That's why Trump is always leading over Biden by at least 35 points last election cycle on the issue of immigration. And now it's like 60 points. Biden's arguments that they will be the ones who actually fund the police more than the Republicans, and Biden's arguments that they will be the ones who actually have increasingly more white nativists and stronger immigration policies is a massive failure for this reason. It goes beyond the ratchet effect that we've talked about. Or I guess it's a complementary to the ratchet effect. And I don't think people recognize that. White supremacist propaganda also impacts non-white people. Internalized racism is a pervasive poison. That definitely is true as well. Wait, sorry, just asking for clarification. The Republicans want illegal migrants for labor exploitation? No, every capital. This is devoid of the two-party structure. Capital owners want some migrants to be classified as illegal, so they are devoid of rights. So they have no legal avenues to resort to when they're being exploited. There's a secondary effect in the creation of a temporary a permanent underclass that also ends up depressing wages for everyone in the country. Because if we truly were a racist nation that wanted to do Oregonian style intervention in immigration, we would start punishing the business owners that actually hire undocumented immigrants. That would destroy the agricultural industry. That would destroy all matter of food production in this country. Real racism in the Pacific Northwest was being for the abolition of slavery and being for making slavery illegal because you didn't want to even be around black people. This is a fact. Like Oregon was a full-blown no black people allowed state. They didn't want slavery because that meant slavery meant having black people live alongside white people. It's literally more racist somehow. A reliance on Mexican workers who contribute their labor to the U.S. economic enterprises but are denied access to the benefits that U.S. law affords its citizens has underpinned the economy for over a century. Take by Aviva Chomsky, who I paraphrase almost regularly anytime I talk about immigration. What you mentioned is literally this
Trump
clip.
Or Biden?
Yeah, Trump.
¿Por qué?
No muchos inmigrantes, como nosotros también somos inmigrantes, pero no mucho.
No más.
No más.
Llegaste, pero no más.
Exactamente, no más.
Yep. I don't agree with you on how illegal immigration depresses wages. The academic consensus that illegal immigrants don't decrease wages. No. The academic consensus is that immigration doesn't depress wages, and that is true. The academic consensus is on immigration not depressing wages. Illegal immigration does depress wages. No, both the studies show both. I have the exact opposite sentiment. The exact opposite sentiment that is expressed by those who tackle this issue, especially those who talk about it. Those who talk about this issue in the form of like immigrants are taking our jobs, immigrants are taking our jobs, look at it from a framework that is fundamentally flawed. There is no concept such as undocumented immigration. There is a concept, however, of people being refused with the full knowledge that they will enter the country regardless. And our agricultural industry relies on it. Sorry, you got banned because you're not subscribed. Oh, dude, I love this study. The Cato Institute is a libertarian institute, for the record. I rely on them heavily when it comes to immigration studies. I knew you were going to probably use this one. This doesn't show what you think it shows, first and foremost. The Cato Institute wants to continue having undocumented migrants. The Cato Institute is the actual institute that loves the fact that they are undocumented. That's why they'll talk about immigrants being undocumented immigrants specifically being not a burden on the economy, but a benefit. It's true. On its face, it is true. It is. Because undocumented immigrants pay into the taxes, both in the sales taxes, but also pay into Social Security without being able to take anything out of Social Security. So technically, they are giving significantly more than they take back. This is something that the Cato Institute openly recognizes and sees as a good thing. Every undocumented immigrant pays into taxes, even property tax, so the notion that they're undocumented is laughable. Yes. A decrease in the supply of immigrants can only increase native wages if immigrants and natives are substitutes for one another. In other words, if they compete for the same jobs. See, this literally is stating that Americans who are documented don't want the jobs that are remained as a consequence of having a underfunded labor pool that will always replenish itself, that is threatened to be in that position at the barrel of a gun with the threat of deportation. Yeah, it's true, but this is a pro-capitalist argument. It also proves the point I'm making. It is exactly like I've read the Cato Institute studies as well. Like the Cato Institute will oftentimes say undocumented immigrants do not take anything from these social safety nets, with the exception of the 0.03% that they can utilize in the form of emergency rooms without paying, right? That's the only thing that they get, which is true. Except I want to fix that structure. I want the undocumented migrants to be documented. Cato, I don't think cares too much about the fixing the documentation structure. They just simply talk about the current way of immigration being the way it is good, or they say it's not as bad as the way Republicans frame it. Here's the the godfather of this sort of thinking, Milton Friedman.
I have always been amused by a kind of a paradox. Suppose you go around and ask people. The United States, as you know, before 1914 had completely free immigration. Anybody could get on a boat and come to these shores, and if he landed on Ellis Island, he was an immigrant. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? You will find hardly a soul who will say it was a bad thing. Almost everybody will say it was a good thing. But then I suppose I say to the same people, but now what about today? Do you think we should have free immigration? Oh no, they'll say, we couldn't possibly have free immigration today. Why, that would flood us with immigrants from India and God knows where. We'd be driven down to a bare subsistence level. What's the difference? How can people be so inconsistent? Why is it that free immigration was a good thing before 1914 and free immigration is a bad thing today? Well, there's a sense in which that answer is right. There's a sense in which free immigration, in the same sense as we had it before 1914, is not possible today. Why not? Because it is one thing to have free immigration to jobs. It is another thing to have free immigration to welfare.
Yeah, our robust welfare state is propping up these free immigrants and their freeloaders, which he's going to address that point in a second and say exactly what I did say. Immigrants can't take advantage of the welfare state, and that's a good thing. It's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. The real solution, the permanent solution to immigration in this country is to greatly expand on the documentation process and allow undocumented immigrants to become documented, both through a pathway to citizenship and through opening up the migration structure, the migration processing that we currently have, so that undocumented migrants can become documented and alongside the already existing documented workforce, advocate for better wages and better conditions. This is how you create pressure, upward pressure from the ground up. This is the only way to do it, as a matter of fact.
And you cannot have both. If you have a welfare state, if you have a state in which every resident is promised certain minimum level of income or a minimum level of subsistence, regardless of whether he works or not, produces it or not, well, then it really is an impossible thing. If you have free immigration in the way in which we had it before 1914, everybody benefited. The people who were here benefited. The people who came benefited. Because nobody would come unless he or his family thought he would do better here than he would elsewhere. And the new immigrants provided additional resources, provided additional possibilities for the people already here. So everybody can mutually benefit. But on the other hand, if you come under circumstances where each person is entitled to a pro rata share of the pot, to take the extreme example, or even to a low level of the pot, then the effect of that situation is that free immigration.
If it's true that the illegal immigration makes a permanent underclass, explain why the Nazis say otherwise. Okay, come on. Boeing whistleblower found dead? What the No way, dude. A former Boeing employee known as raising concern about the firm production standards have been found dead? Yo, this is terrifying.
Would mean a reduction of everybody to the same uniform level. Of course, I'm exaggerating. It wouldn't go quite that far, but it would go in that direction.
Being documented alone does not give you bargaining rights. People in work visas are exploited. Yes, I know. I don't think that is appropriate either. That is another labor safety concern. The H-1B visa structure also creates a negative incentive, creates an incentive for bosses, specifically in the tech sector, and I'm sure many of you now formerly software engineers working at any number of different tech companies have seen. It is not an accident that many people got fired, with the exception of H-1B visa workers, because they can be further exploited. The solution to that is to make sure that can't happen, so that they also have the same level of safety that natural-born U.S. citizens have. There is a reason why Elon Musk did this exact same thing. He fired half the workforce, kept only the immigrant workers in many instances, in many of the places, because he knew he could work them to the bone, because their job doesn't have the same pressure, doesn't just have the same pressure of being tied to your health care, which is another way that capital owners exploit you. Just remember, you have no mobility because your health care is tied to your job. You have no mobility because you are saddled with debt, right? Think about that. Now, think about a documented immigrant worker. Their existence, everything that they know living in the United States of America, trying to create a life for themselves here as a documented part of the labor force, relies on them keeping their job. It's not just the health care. It's not just the student loan debt that they have. But now there's a third reason. There's a third, much more severe consequence if you lose your job. So remember that. These are all pressure points. These are all ways that your bosses can exploit you. These are the reasons why we simply cannot get health care in this country, something that is often forgotten.
And it is that perception that leads people to adopt what at first seem like inconsistent values. Look, for example, at the obvious, immediate, practical case of illegal Mexican immigration. Now, that Mexican immigration over the border.
Same with H-1A workers who are largely temporary migrant farm workers. Yes. So this is the other thing I wanted to mention. A lot of countries do this. A lot of countries, you have different ways of taking advantage of creating like somewhat of an underclass in your labor structure. The most common or the most woke version of this is the EU structure, right? You can either, one, rely on the currency exchange in the home nation and, bring in migrant workers to be like, hey, listen, like you're getting paid a shit ton more here and you can feed your family back home. This is another form of the unequal exchange that happens within the global north and the global south. That is literally the most woke version of this. That's one form of exploitation. Another form of exploitation is by tying it to the wages in your country, right? Polish workers in the UK is an example of this. This also still creates a depressive force in the existing labor structure, because these people will voluntarily take on jobs that have fear and workplace conditions, a lack of workplace safety, really gruesome jobs without demanding the pay that is allotted for said gruesome jobs in a circumstance where there is only one labor pool. The problem with America is that it is hyper exploitative, right? Like it goes beyond. It takes advantage of all of those different forms of depressing wages. It already utilizes the unequal exchange in the form of currency exchange. It also then utilizes the H-1A visas, which offer migration, temporary migrant status to migrant workers that are utilized in California in the farmland, which is a form of documentation that, one, relies on the currency exchange and also relies on the poverty of the host nation where a lot of these migrant workers are coming from. And then on top of that, you have the H-1B visas, like I said, which is another form of taking advantage of the two different things that I just mentioned earlier. Plus, on top of that, the additional pressure of not wanting to lose your job and therefore lose your immigration status. But that is not enough for Americans, for our capital owners who are so hungry for exploitation. The last part of the dynamic is undocumented migration. In spite of it all, we still know that people from places that we've, by the way, with our interventions, places that we have not allowed to develop evenly, there will come a steady flow of migrant workers that can't have access because we've greatly restricted the first three versions that I just mentioned, the first two versions that I mentioned of documented migration. So therefore, we then also rely on undocumented migrants constantly coming in. This is the group that is the least protected, that works in the worst conditions, even worse than the other two conditions that I mentioned. Do you get it? Why? Because Purdue is a great example of this. The chicken producers at Purdue, In places like Alabama, they rely on undocumented migrants. They hire undocumented migrants willingly, deliberately. They create trailer parks for these undocumented migrants. And when there is a ton of back pay or sexual assault allegations launched against them, when the undocumented migrants say, like, enough is enough, you have to pay us more, or you have to pay us what you owe us, then they call ICE and they deport their own workforce, only to go back to the drawing board and do the exact same thing immediately after. Purdue Pharma is not Purdue Pharma. There's two different Purdues. There's Purdue Pharma, and then there's Purdue the chicken factory. So you have to remember, when you see the Alabama Hyundai facility utilizing migrant workers that are children, for example, that is by design. That is not an accident. That didn't like slip through the cracks. That was a deliberate way to hire workers that have no legal form of restitution, no way to push back, no way to fight back. It is the most hyper exploitative structure that exists on the planet, with the exception of like slave labor in Dubai and places like that. Straight up, it's happening all around us every single day. And it is what keeps the American engine running. Without it, we would not have an agricultural output at all. We would not be able to produce a surplus of food. Here it is. Chicken plants see little fallout from immigration raids because these plants are the ones who call immigration on themselves, for the record. I've covered this. These plants are the plants that call the INS or ICE now on themselves. They do it on purpose because the fines that they get that reduce their workforce only to because they know that they're going to be able to go and get new undocumented migrants immediately. The fines that they get, it's a math equation for them. Oh yeah, we get a slap on the wrist, we get a little bit of a fine, but guess what? We don't do the back pay. We don't have to now pay the back pay. They can't fucking sue for workplace harassment or sexual assaults, or even workplace a lack of workplace safety measures put in place in other places. So all of the money that they save greatly outweighs the money that they lose when they have to pay a fine for hiring undocumented migrants. It's a tiny slap on the wrist. So the reality is, it's a cost-benefit analysis, and even the most like wonky Democrat, even if you were, or the most wonky right-wing, hyper-nationalist, white supremacist nut job, if they wanted to greatly reduce immigration in this country, they would actually go after the business owners and make it so costly for them to hire undocumented immigrants that they can no longer get away with hiring undocumented immigrants and refusing to give them the actual pay that they deserve. But nobody does that because even the most racist motherfucker still is a capitalist in this country. Do you understand? Just remember that next time someone presents this to you. There is a lot of capitalist exploitation that many liberals would be willing and able to look in the other direction of. America goes far beyond that.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing for the illegal immigrants. It's a good thing for the United States. It's a good thing for the citizens of the country. But it's only good so long as it's illegal.
See? He's saying it.
That's an interesting paradox to think about. Make it legal, and it's no good. Why? Because as long as it's illegal, the people who come in do not qualify for welfare. They don't qualify for...
This is why Milton Friedman, this is where the Cato Institute is coming from, by the way. This is the angle that they come from. They won't say it like Milton is.
Social Security. They don't qualify for all the other myriads of benefits that we pour out from our left pocket into our right pocket. And so as long as they don't qualify, they migrate to jobs. They take jobs that most residents of this country are unwilling to take. They provide employers with workers of a kind they cannot get. They're hard workers, they're good workers, and they are clearly better off.
He's right, by the way. He's absolutely right. This is the reason why I believe we have to fix immigration, not in the direction that the Republican Party is going towards, and not in the direction that the Democratic Party is going towards. We have to fix immigration in the other direction. Okay, we have to document every citizen that works here. We have to offer them workplace protection so they are no longer fearful of deportation if they speak out. We have to allow them to unionize alongside the documented labor force to truly create one singular labor pool. This is the only way to greatly improve wages and workplace safety standards in this country. And unfortunately, many people, due to decades of right-wing framing on the matter, don't ever broach the subject with the same certainty.
If you ever want to know how what people prefer, the surest sign is how they vote with their feet. And there is no doubt how the Brazilians vote. They vote to cross the border with their feet, on their feet, or in any other way they can. He said
the Jesus Christ. Dog, it ain't 1943. That's crazy.
And perhaps millions, for all I know. Illegal immigration is fascinating because it shows not only the main point I'm trying to bring out now, how interconnected are the various aspects of freedom, how interconnected is the problem of governmental arrangements for welfare and governmental arrangements for immigration and other things. But it shows a very different point that's kind of a digression. And that is how bad laws make socially advantageous acts illegal. And therefore,
like, one immediate solution to this, without even touching migration, would be sectoral bargaining. Obviously, we need to fix the immigration system. It's fundamentally broken for this reason that this was like gleefully recounting. But if you did sectoral bargaining that over-encompassed entire industries, including sectors that overwhelmingly hire undocumented migrants deliberately, then this would no longer be a problem.
Leads to an undermining of morality in general.
But we can't do that, and we won't do that. Anyway, do you believe in open borders? Our borders are open. Our borders are already open. There is no such thing as like closed borders. You either document those who are coming in and process them appropriately, or you don't, and you allow them to fall through the cracks and be hyper exploited. 52% of the undocumented migrants in this country are visa overstayers.